Colleagues, now, following my decision to suspend voting at decision time last night, I wanted to bring members up to date with how we will resume proceedings today, and in particular how we will deal with those votes. Now, I want to begin, if I may, with an apology. Yesterday's debate on the Baroness Cumberledge report was a powerful, compelling and emotive discussion of issues of real significance to the people of Scotland, not least to the women affected in the report, and such as those who have campaigned so persuasively on the issue of transvaginal mesh implants. Not to be able to conclude our debate in a satisfactory manner was a disservice to all of those who followed that debate and, in fact, to all of those who followed Parliament. I think it's important that I apologise for that to members and those who did so. Turning to the difficulties raised at decision time itself, I want to update you, and I've written to all members. Members will have received that in the last few minutes, but I wanted to put the content of that letter on the record. So taking the issues in order, the first we experienced yesterday related to the PIN code being changed. Now, this was an accidental administrative error. I fully recognise how much confusion that caused. What we can confirm, however, is that members using any of the PIN codes issued were still able to access the system, and I can offer the further reassurance that we have since taken action by adding in an extra authorisation process, which will avoid this happening in the future. Now, turning to the vote itself, I've had the opportunity to consider all the information about members who did or did not record votes. This analysis shows that only one member who was entitled to vote was unable to do so at decision time last night. If that member's vote had been recorded, the result of the vote would have been yes 58, no 58, with no abstentions. In those circumstances, I would have used my casting vote in line with convention, and I would have voted against the amendment. The outcome of the vote would therefore not have been any different had that member been able to cast their vote. Now, on the basis of this information, I am confident that the result of the vote is therefore reliable, and as such, the vote on Neil Findlay's amendment stands. I appreciate and acknowledge that not all members will be happy at my decision, but I believe that to rerun the vote would be even more unfair. Now, that said, I do understand that the earlier administrative error, followed by a lack of clarity in explaining what was happening, had the effect that some members are starting to lose confidence in the system. And can I take this opportunity once more to apologise unreservedly for this? The decision to go live at the earliest opportunity with the remote voting system developed over the summer recess was taken in the knowledge that we would all be learning as we go along. And I know we have some way to go to build more confidence in the system. The Bureau is therefore meeting again tonight to discuss how we can do just that. In the meantime, we'll take care to ensure the messaging and communication about what is happening during the votes, both in the Chamber and on the Blue Jean system, is clear. Importantly, learning the lessons from last night, we will also build in additional pauses to allow members to communicate any issues to the Chair, particularly to those participating on the video conferencing platform. Now, my letter to all MSPs this afternoon also highlights key issues from the remote voting guidance that I hope will be helpful as we all continue to familiarise ourselves with the system. And finally, can I assure you that the Bureau is actively pursuing all options to ensure we can iron out any remaining issues and work hard to rebuild your confidence in the voting system. I would thank you for your patience. Point of order, Neil Findlay.
Thank you very much for that explanation. I've spoken to a number of members today, and a number have come and to speak to me. Not one of them, not one, is of the view that that vote should have stood last night. I find it inexplicable that that decision was made, and that is with the greatest respect to yourself, but I have no idea how that was allowed to stand. The issue at stake last night was very important, and I believe the decision made will have a negative impact on some women in Scotland and their health. But let's put that to aside. Let's put the issue aside. This is about the integrity of this Parliament to take decisions and then be recorded to be correct. And yesterday was a shambles. It cannot be allowed to happen. And as I said yesterday, every vote sucks more of the credibility out of the system rather than builds the credibility of the system. Out of respect to yourself, Presiding Officer, today I will be putting a motion forward. I will be putting a motion forward today expressing members' lack of belief in the system. And I would appeal to members across the chamber to support that motion so that our view, collective view, can be put across to the corporate body, the Bureau, the Presiding Officer, officials and whoever, that we have no confidence in the system that's been operated.
Can I thank Mr Finlay for the point of order and indeed for the manner. I know how passionately he feels about this particular subject matter that was voted on last night. I would urge members are clearly at liberty to lay down any motions they wish. I would urge all members to bring any concerns they have either to their business manager, to the business team or directly to me. I can assure you that it matters to me, it matters to all members that the voting system has the confidence of this Parliament. The alternatives to the remote voting system are perhaps equally, if not more, unpalatable. And we have to work out in the middle of this coronavirus pandemic how exactly we ensure that all members are able to vote and participate fully in proceedings, despite the fact that they can not attend in person. Daniel Johnson, point of order.
Further to Mr Finlay's point of order, and indeed further to my point of order yesterday, can you please advise how your ruling today fits with Standing Order 11.7.3, which I read out yesterday? Because on my understanding, when the electronic voting system has produced an unreliable result, the Standing Order state quite clearly that that vote must be repeated. And if that is not successful, that a roll call vote must be taken. It does not state that the result should be deliberated upon or analysed. It says that it should be retaken. And likewise, it strikes me that it's perfectly possible to take a roll call vote using video conferencing and that members could register their vote. Indeed, members were communicating with yourself directly using that technology. So could you please advise how your ruling fits with that standing order? And indeed, whether or not a roll call vote is possible using the technology that we're currently using in the chamber.
Thank Mr Johnson for his point of order and commend him with his knowledge of standing orders or his ability to Google them very quickly. Mr Johnson is absolutely right, and it's the correct standing order too. Without commenting on the roll call vote, which is always an option open to the chair, the key point that Mr Johnson highlighted is whether or not the vote was reliable. Now, the key thing is that I have looked at the vote. We are able to analyse all of those who are eligible to vote and all of those who did vote. And I can assure you, all of those who are eligible to vote, except for one person, used their vote. And that information has been circulated widely to all members. So there is no doubt about the reliability of the vote. If Mr Johnson can name any member or bring any evidence that it was unreliable, I can assure you I will look at that matter. But as far as I'm aware, and in fact I'm very certain that we are very sure who is eligible and who voted, and therefore the vote will count. And to rerun the vote would be more unfair than leaving it to stand. No, point of order, please, Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And if I could just reiterate some of the comments that have been made, is that the voting system is such in this Parliament that it brings the Parliament into disrepute. And as a parliamentarian, I find that really difficult to stomach. And I also find it difficult to stomach that we have been told before on numerous occasions that this system was robust. It is clearly not robust. Now, Presiding Officer, I think if you look back at the record, and I cannot remember exactly which division it was, you said in one of the stage 3 divisions that if the votes had been close, you would have had no option but to rerun the vote. And I think those were your exact words, Presiding Officer. This vote couldn't have been closer. Therefore, on a point of order, I ask whether you will reflect that it would be appropriate to rerun the vote as you said you would in a previous circumstance.
Thank Mr Mountain for the point of order. I am very much aware of the advice I gave members then. I can assure members I was aware of it when I looked at this matter. The key fact in this situation is that if the member who is eligible to vote had voted, it would not have affected the outcome of the vote, and that is the crucial factor. Point of order, Bruce Crawford.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's related to the other points of order, Presiding Officer. But first of all, can I say that for my part, I welcome your apology and I accept the ruling that you've made. I think it's the right decision that you've made. But there's a wider issue that I'm concerned about that people need to bear in mind when we're talking about a remote voting system. There are members in this chamber who are more elderly than I am, even though I'm getting on a bit, who are very concerned on a daily basis about being here, and therefore I think, as we're going through this pandemic, it's essential that we've got to have some sort of remote voting system that operates effectively. So I hope that we can iron out all of the matters. There's one other matter I'd like to raise that concerned me yesterday, Presiding Officer. As the support staff who were trying to support MSPs who could not access the system, many of them had to come into pretty close contact with other MSPs. Now, my concern is for their safety as well as ours. And I think it's something that needs to be reviewed in terms of the support staff and those who are trying to help members access the system that sometimes doesn't work for them individually. And on many occasions, as we probably all would recognise, it's not always down to the system, it's sometimes down to human error.
I thank Mr Crawford for both very constructive points of order. The point about the proximity of support staff has been noted, but we'll issue reminders both to MSPs and to our staff themselves, as appreciated. Point of order, Mr Finlay.
And Daniel Johnson's point. Can I say Bruce Crawford makes a very, very good point. Everybody wants a system that works. Everybody understands the circumstances that individuals are in. We want a system that works. You said that it would be more unfair to rerun the vote rather if we were to do that today. With respect, that is your opinion. Others have a different opinion. I certainly do. Daniel Johnson referred to the standing order. And nowhere in the part that he read out did it say that if those circumstances prevail, that you can go away for 20 hours, consider what's happened, have an investigation and come back and then make a decision. My understanding of that standing order is that that vote would take place immediately after there had been the confusion. So are we now saying that if such a circumstance prevails again, we will have a similar situation as we had yesterday, that we'll go away, we'll have a stewards' inquiry and we'll come back the next day and we'll find out what happened?
I would thank Mr Finlay for his point, and I note the points he makes. Now, can we move on to the next item of business? Sorry, yes, Mr Harvey, who did give me advance notice of another point of order entirely. Mr Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm sorry to take up the Chamber's time after very important points of order on another matter, but this is a separate issue. As you'll be aware, Presiding Officer, the UK Government has today introduced the UK Internal Market Bill. This bill is not only extremely politically contentious, driving a coach and horses through the devolution settlement and creating huge objections, not only here, but in terms of devolution elsewhere in the UK and, of course, in relation to the Northern Ireland peace process. It is also, as has been admitted by the UK Government on the record in the House of Commons, a breach of international law. So I ask for your guidance on Rule 9B of our standing orders, which deals with legislative consent, as to how Parliament is to be protected from having unlawful legislation put before us. As you'll be aware, if the Scottish Government introduces a bill which, for example, breaches ECHR, it's your job to protect this Parliament, and you have to make a decision as to whether that bill is competent to be introduced. And even if we consider legislation which is ultimately found to breach ECHR, it is no longer, in that respect, law. What provision exists similarly to protect this Parliament from being asked to take or be complicit in unlawful action by scrutinising and potentially casting a vote on legislation which the UK Government itself admits is a breach of international law?
Can I thank Mr Harvey for the advance notice of the point of order, and clearly it's a very important matter, a very topical matter today. In this particular case, if the UK Parliament decides to legislate in a devolved area or to alter the devolved settlement, then it's quite clear that the LCM process applies. Now, what I would suggest is that Parliament, I'm sure, would fully take into account the points that Mr Harvey raises while expressing in deciding whether or not to withhold or to grant consent during that LCM process. Now, thank you. I think we're going to move on, if we can, to the next item of business, which is portfolio questions. And the first subject for portfolio questions is environment, climate change and land reform. Question number 1, Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with Inverclyde Council, Transport Scotland and Scottish Water regarding their plans to eliminate flooding in Inverclyde. Minister
Marie Goujon.
We are all acutely aware of the problems that are faced by many communities at risk from flooding. A flood strategy group operates in Inverclyde, comprising of representatives from Inverclyde Council, Scottish Water and Transport Scotland to manage and reduce the risk of flooding. The Scottish Government provides £42 million per year to local authorities to fulfil their flood risk management functions. And our recent programme for government included a commitment to providing an additional £150 million for flood risk management. And that's over and above the £42 million per year we provide to local authorities to fulfil their flood risk management functions. The Scottish Government works with all relevant agencies involved in trying to reduce the impact of flooding on communities.
Stuart McMillan.
I thank the Minister for her answer, and while efforts undoubtedly will have impacted by COVID-19 this year, these issues are not new. That they are decades-long problems we've had. Further localised flooding on the A8, yet again blocking the main eastward vehicular route in and out of Inverclyde, ultimately highlights the failing of these agencies to work to eliminate this issue. Does the Minister agree that this historical issue should not continue to, first of all, plague my constituency year in, year out, and can she ensure that these organisations provide solutions that my constituency demands?
Minister Marie Goujon.
I thank the member for that question because I do completely understand his concern and frustration at the ongoing situation there. And we absolutely share that desire to see effective and coordinated action to minimise the impact of surface water flooding on Stuart McMillan's constituents and everyone who uses the local trunk network. Responsibility for surface water resulting from severe rainfall sits with Inverclyde Council. Scottish Water manages problems caused by flooded sewers, and Transport Scotland has a role in managing drainage of major trunk roads. So this is something where where different public bodies have different responsibilities. Now, priority areas of surface water flooding are expected to be taken forward by Inverclyde Council as part of their surface water management plans. And the Scottish Government encourages all these parties to work closely together to achieve the reductions in the scale and frequency of these local surface water flooding incidents.
Thank you. Joan McAlpine.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what help is available to farmers and crofters to support them cut emissions.
Minister. Sorry, actually, I'm thinking that Ms McAlpine... Yes, I'm sorry. I think Ms McAlpine pressed her button. I thought it was actually as a supplementary to question 1. She's obviously read out question 5, so we'll come back to that later. So moving on to question 2, Willie Coffey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government, in light of the impact of vacant and derelict land on the environment, what action it is taking to tackle this.
Cabinet Secretary Rosanna Cunningham.
We committed to consider the recommendations of the Vacant and Derelict Land Task Force and explore opportunities to invest in our local blue and green infrastructure, targeting problematic long-term vacant and derelict land. It is expected that National Planning Framework 4 will strengthen our policies on this, building on experience and innovation from across Scotland. We will publish an update on NPF 4 later this year and lay a draft in Parliament in 2021.
Willie Coffey.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that helpful answer, most of which I heard. She will be aware, like me, that we see a lot of vacant and derelict land sites within the urban setting too. Can I ask what the Government can do about this, and whether that is something that the Vacant and Derelict Land Task Force that was established in 2018 could look at more closely to try and help with this problem?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, later this month, the Scottish Land Commission will be publishing recommendations of the Vacant and Derelict Land Task Force, which have been developed over this period of time with very extensive stakeholder input. And we welcome the work of the task force and will consider the report and recommendations in detail when we receive them. We will publish a response in due course and continue to work with the Scottish Land Commission to tackle the legacy of vacant and derelict land in urban and rural areas right across Scotland.
And a supplementary question from Claudia Beamish. And Claudia Beamish is joining us remotely. Ms Beamish?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Doctor. Will the programme for government's commitment to identify vacant and derelict sites for green infrastructure initiatives be targeted to those in depressed, given that research has shown that half of Scotland's population living in these communities live up to 500 metres from site? And I do note what the Cabinet Secretary says about the task force, but hope that this will be, point I've raised, will be taken into account.
Thank you. Cabinet Secretary.
I got all of that question. I think from what I could hear, Claudia Beamish was asking about those people who were living most near to vacant and derelict land sites. I think I should point out that the 2019 survey on this area did identify that just 4 councils in Scotland together contain over 50% of all recorded derelict and urban vacant land. So we are very conscious of the issues that arise for those communities that live most closely to that. It's been regrettable that this year, because of what has happened, some more of the progress that might have been made hasn't been made. But there are communities in Scotland who are beginning to look at the possibilities of right to buy in this particular area. And I would encourage all those communities so considering, and indeed members of this Parliament who may represent such communities, to assist them in developing proposals to think about taking over local vacant and derelict land sites.
Thank you. Question number 3, Daniel Johnson.
To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with Scottish Water regarding upgrading and improving the maintenance of urban drainage in light of instances of heavy flooding.
Cabinet Secretary.
In the investment period 2015 to 21, the Scottish Government tasked Scottish Water with investing in its sewer infrastructure, primarily to reduce the risk of internal flooding to customers. Scottish Water estimates that it will invest up to £190 million in measures to reduce sewer flood risk. I've also discussed with Scottish Water its surface water policy, which aims to significantly reduce the amount of surface water entering the sewer network to further protect customers from flooding, particularly given the context of an increase in intense storm events.
Daniel Johnson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response, and indeed my question very much follows on from that of Stuart McMillan's. Polwarth in my constituency is just one area that has experienced heavy flooding in recent weeks, with the collapse of a wall which in different circumstances could have caused injury or indeed death. Indeed, severe weather in August was analysed by Scottish Water and was determined to have been a 1 in 1,000 year event, but unfortunately these events are occurring all the more frequently. Mary Goujon, in her answer to Stuart McMillan, pointed out that responsibility lies between 3 agencies, between Transport Scotland, Scottish Water and indeed local authorities. And the experience of my constituents is that leads to a never-ending dispute as to where responsibility lies. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary what action the Scottish Government is doing to not just support dialogue between these agencies, but to actually ensure that outcomes are arrived at and infrastructure is upgraded and invested in so that we can respond to these excess weather events? Thank you.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think I did outline the investment and work that is ongoing to deal with the infrastructure problems. Daniel Johnson is quite correct, however, in the the nature of the problem is becoming more and more acute. I am indeed aware of the situation in his area, Polwarth Grove. This is not an area where there was any history of sewer flooding. And I think that Scottish Water has written to him to confirm that it was primarily rainfall driven. And this is one of the issues that we do have to ascertain. I have some sympathy with the direction of his question. I know that there are a number of members who will be experiencing situations where the multi-agency response does not always seem to be as coordinated as it might be. I'll certainly go back on the issue of Polwarth to see whether or not that could have been better handled there. But these are real issues that are confronting us all at the moment as we see climate change beginning to have its impact on the way our weather is developing and the enormous impact that is having on infrastructure, which was not designed to cope with it. The investment that we are putting into that will gradually help that, but I do appreciate that that doesn't necessarily answer the more immediate questions for people who are right now suffering from flooding events.
And Edward Mountain.
Presiding Officer, Cabinet Secretary, I've written to you about a constituent who can't go out after heavy rain because what he finds on the path and in his garden. You have referred now to internal flooding. Will you be able to prioritise works to drainage which cause sewage to flow up into people's gardens as a matter of urgency? Because it's just not acceptable.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm aware of the case raised by Edward Mountain, and I think Scottish Water has already been directly in contact with his constituent. And I certainly think in the first instance, the best way forward is to open that dialogue directly with the organisations concerned.
Thank you very much. Question number 4, Donald Cameron.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to tackle littering in the Highlands and Islands.
Minister Marie Cujon.
Well, firstly, we just want to make our position absolutely clear in that littering is unlawful and unacceptable. And to help combat recent issues, we have, with partners Zero Waste Scotland and Keep Scotland Beautiful, developed an anti-littering campaign. And this includes bespoke materials for 21 local authorities, including Highland Council. And we continue collective efforts to encourage everyone to respect their surroundings, and we're working with the relevant public agencies to deliver a coordinated approach, and that includes raising awareness about behaving responsibly when out in the countryside.
Donald Cameron.
I thank the Minister for her answer. Highland Council are backing Zero Waste Scotland's new campaign, Scotland is Stunning, Let's Keep It That Way, and they're placing posters at popular tourist sites which ask visitors to leave no trace. But given the severe problems of littering across the Highlands and Islands this summer, causing significant concerns for local communities, what further support can the Scottish Government provide to local authorities to help them promote that message?
Minister.
Thank you. I mean, I'm absolutely aware of the issues that have been faced, again, particularly in the Highlands and Islands, but also in other parts of Scotland. And the Cabinet Secretary for the Rural Economy and Tourism met with Highland Council and I think a few of the community councils in July of this year, to see what more could be done and what further action could be taken. And I believe that there is due to be a national summit which will be held on Monday, which will be chaired by the Cabinet Secretary, which has been convened by Visit Scotland, so it can really look at what more can be done to tackle the situation here and what can be done in the short, medium and longer term to really tackle and fully address these issues.
David Torrance, to be followed by Alistair Allen.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the commitment in the programme for government of a £70 million fund to improve local authority refuge collection and infrastructure. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline how the Scottish Government will work with local authorities to enable us to meet waste and recycling targets for 2025?
Minister.
I thank the member for that question, and as David Torrance outlines, and as it was outlined in the programme for government, we will establish a £70 million fund to improve local authority collection infrastructure and develop a new route map to reduce waste and meet the very ambitious targets that we have. Now, we are committed to working with COSLA to evaluate the Household Recycling Charter and its code of practice, and that will be a key step in developing a future model of recycling collections. And that work will be led led by the Circular Economy and Waste Strategic Steering Group that we established earlier this year, and that includes senior representatives from COSLA, from Solace, local authorities and Zero Waste Scotland.
And Alistair Allen.
What more can the Government do to ensure that visitors boarding ferries to the islands, the great majority of whom I should say are law-abiding and responsible, are given clear information about best practice on camping when it comes to the disposal of litter and waste?
Minister.
Thank you. I mean, again, this is something that I would want to highlight, that our islands are absolutely beautiful. We want them to stay that way, but they are also often fragile landscapes, and everyone that's visiting them should behave responsibly and also respectfully to the people that live on the islands. Now, Nature Scot is promoting the Scottish Outdoor Access Code across the whole country, and its online campaign to raise awareness of responsibility has already resulted in over 250,000 visits to the Scottish Outdoor Access Code website already. And Visit Scotland and Zero Waste Scotland have also undertaken activity to address litter and waste issues. And local authorities, including island authorities, are also playing a vital role in that work. Our ferries are also absolutely key to getting guidance to travellers, and I'm more than happy to look at what more work might be done on that. We get very good feedback from the ferry companies and work closely with them on matters like this. And I know too that local MSPs and MPs are engaging and supporting activity locally, and I very much welcome that work and we very much hope it will continue into the future.
And now, opportunity to hear Joe McAlpine's question. Number 5, Joe McAlpine.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what progress it is making in meeting its climate change targets, and to help achieve this, what support it has made available to reduce emissions on farms and crofts.
Cabinet Secretary Rosanna Callaghan.
Scotland is halfway to meeting our world-leading target of net zero emissions by 2045 from the 1990 baseline. This is a good long-term progress. In fact, we are second only to Sweden in Western Europe in long-term emissions reductions. Farming and crofting are playing their part in this progress. Last month, we established a £1.5 million fund to help create more woodland on small farms and crofts. And in the programme for government, we announced a new £10 million pilot sustainable agriculture capital grant scheme to support farmers and crofters to address climate change.
Joan McAlpine.
Thank you. Can the Cabinet Secretary offer specific detail on what help is available to small farmers and in particular tenant farmers to help them cut emissions?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the new fund of £1.5 million to help small farmers and crofters create smaller scale woods and shelter belts on their land holdings is what applies in this case. These funds will also support the purchase of specialist forestry equipment for these small-scale operations and will be available to tenant farmers as well as owners and crofters. And I also want to make sure that the Small Farm Grant Scheme works more effectively, and there will shortly be a review commenced. I know there are many tenant and small farmers in the south of Scotland and Dumfriesshire who are already playing their part in cutting emissions, and more who want to do so. We want to, and by we I mean across the whole of government, but particularly my colleague Fergus Ewing and myself, want to ensure they can access support that will help them contribute to our climate change targets.
Liam MacArthur.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The ban on burning plastics on farms and crofts is aimed at reducing emissions. However, the Cabinet Secretary will be aware of the particular difficulties for farmers and crofters in our smaller islands in complying. Given the financial and environmental costs of shipping plastics, will she look again at the case for a targeted exemption, perhaps under the Islands Act?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm happy to discuss the specific issue that Liam MacArthur is raised directly with him. I am, of course, conscious that the islands particularly face a number of challenges in respect of a number of different areas, this being one. So I will engage directly with the member on that very particular issue.
Thank you. Question number 6, Sandra White.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when it last met the UK Government to discuss the COP26 conference due to take place in Glasgow in November 21.
Cabinet Secretary.
I spoke to COP26 President Alok Sharma regarding the decision to postpone COP26 on the 1st of April. He has, of course, since visited Scotland, but declined to meet with either myself or anyone else from the Scottish Government. I do hope to engage with him again soon to discuss COP26 and our government's shared ambition to deliver net zero economies. My officials are, of course, in regular contact with their UK government counterparts on COP26, covering areas such as policy, strategic communications, safety, security and resilience, and transport planning.
Sandra White.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that reply. Very disappointing. I just wondered if you're going ahead with any further discussions, particularly on the commitment of the UK Government to provide the financial support to ensure a safe, secure and successful COP26, and whether or not an agreement at this time has been reached or is likely to be reached on a suitable venue for the Scottish Government to host events throughout COP26.
Cabinet Secretary.
Scottish ministers have already made clear their expectation that all costs arising from the decision to hold COP26 in Glasgow will be borne by the UK Government. Core costs have got to include funding for police, fire and ambulance services and other key stakeholders to both prepare for and, in fact, deliver a safe, secure and successful event. Now, we did offer Glasgow Science Centre to the UK Government in the spirit of partnership on the provision that we secured an alternative venue. Finalising arrangements for this have been delayed due to COVID-19.
Thank you. Question 7 has not been lodged. Question 8, James Dornan.
To ask the Scottish Government how its programme for government aims to tackle climate change through support for the green economy.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the programme for government has net zero at the heart of its focus on new jobs, good jobs and green jobs. For example, the groundbreaking £1.6 billion commitment will transform heat and energy efficiency as part of an enhanced Green New Deal. It will drive Scotland's green recovery and could directly support up to 5,000 green jobs while tackling fuel poverty and rapidly accelerating decarbonisation of an area which makes up a quarter of Scotland's emissions. Additional investment of £500 million will be made in Scotland's natural economy, including an extra £150 million to help deliver a 50% increase in woodland creation targets by 2024 and £150 million for flood risk management for a more climate resilient Scotland.
James Dornan.
Secretary, for that answer. The announcements are all very welcome, particularly those with multi-annual funding, creating the certainty that's required. But can the Cabinet Secretary outline what else the programme, besides those 5,000 jobs that are connected to the heat and energy efficiency investment programme, what else the programme for government delivers in terms of green jobs, which will be so central to our recovery from COVID-19?
Cabinet Secretary.
We're aligning our commitments to green skills and training to well-targeted investments in heat, housing, active travel and natural infrastructure that will drive demand in green markets and deliver those green jobs. To support this, the £60 million youth guarantee will include green apprenticeships, and our £25 million National Transition Training Fund will support retraining to access green jobs. We are also investing £100 million in a Green Jobs Fund to support businesses which provide sustainable and or low carbon products and services to help them develop, grow and create jobs.
And Liz Smith.
Thank you. Just on the same theme, and given the evidence that was taken at yesterday's Environment Committee meeting in this Parliament, when green jobs were very much centre of the attention, could I ask the Cabinet Secretary just to outline what formal discussions the Scottish Government is having with the business community about extending some of the programmes that she's just mentioned to James Dornan?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, we're having these discussions across government directly with those, particularly those in all of our relevant portfolio areas, as you might expect. I discuss the issue of green jobs very regularly, as does my colleague Fergus Ewing, and I know that other colleagues are doing so as well. If there is a register of all of those discussions immediately available, we will try and flag as much as possible to Liz Smith. However, those conversations are happening on a very regular basis indeed, and you would expect that to be the case.
Thank you very much. That concludes questions on environment, climate change and land reform. We're going to move on now to the rural economy and tourism portfolio. Our first question is from Beatrice Wishart.
To ask the Scottish Government what recent engagement it has had with the fishing industry in relation to wind farm developments.
Minister Marie Goujon.
The Scottish Government has been working closely with fishers and stakeholder organisations to help ensure good relationships between the fishing and the renewable energy sectors. That has included undertaking considerable engagement with the fishing industry and representatives, including from Shetland, in relation to offshore wind farm developments. And in particular, we've consulted widely in relation to future planning of offshore wind farm development, consented wind farm projects and related research.
Beatrice Wishart.
I thank the Minister for her answer, but some parts of the fishing industry are frustrated that fisheries organisations have not been approached about proposed sites for offshore wind farm development. The fishing industry isn't against renewable energy, but it needs to be included early in discussions. Fishermen with historic ties to fishing grounds know the seabed and can help with offshore wind farm location in appropriate areas. What assurances can the Cabinet Secretary give that there won't be a negative impact on the seabed and spawning stocks of these developments? And does the Scottish Government recognise fishing industry concerns?
Minister.
I really want to thank Beatrice Wishart for that question, and I really want to assure the member that these are concerns that I do take seriously, because, of course, the member mentioned in her question the fact that these concerns fishers obviously want to be involved as early as possible in any possible discussions that are taking place. Now, I would say we're always looking at ways that we can try and continuously improve engagement and communication between the renewables and fishing sectors, and my officials within the Sea Fisheries team and within the Marine Scotland Licensing and Operations team and Marine Planning and Strategy team are all working together to ensure that relevant fishing organisations are contacted at all stages of offshore wind development. And I know that my officials will be happy to engage with wider fisheries interests if Beatrice Wishart thinks that that would be helpful.
Jamie Halker-Johnson, to be followed by Stuart Stevenson.
To ask the Scottish Government what assessment has been made of the impact of COVID-19 outbreak on tourism businesses in the Highlands and Islands.
I'm sorry, Mr Halker-Johnson, again, I think we've made a mistake of, I assumed you were pressing your button on a supplementary to the first question, but it's actually a later question. Stuart Stevenson.
Given that the fish processing industry is the biggest sector by turnover and by employment, what assurances has the Scottish Government had from the UK Government that the ability of that industry to continue to export to its major markets in the EU and beyond will be preserved in the event of the no deal that we see looming within a week's time?
Marie Goujon.
I absolutely share the member's very serious concerns about this issue, and particularly for the processing sector. Because one thing that the Brexiteers did was put fishing front and centre of their campaign, insisting that leaving the EU would mean a boom time for our fishing fleets. But of course, we have to look out for our processing sector and what that means for them too. So we are constantly working to try and get these assurances from the UK Government, which as yet we have not received. And as the member has said, the clock is in fact ticking. We need to have these assurances because we want to protect this sector in Scotland. And it's one sector that the Scottish Government is standing up for and will continue to stand up for in these negotiations as we go forward.
Thank you. Question number 2, Alexander Burnett.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I ask the Scottish Government what support is available to the agricultural shows and fairs that have had to cancel due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the rural communities and charities that rely on the income these generate?
Cabinet Secretary Fergus Ewing.
Presiding Officer, there's no doubt that the loss of agricultural and Highland shows and fairs this year has been acutely felt in rural communities, not least for the loss of social interaction and economic activity they both provide and they create. Some show committees have moved their events online, others have postponed or cancelled completely,
A few have gone ahead after undertaking appropriate risk assessments, distancing and hygiene measures. We have published guidance for running outdoor events, which we expect organisers to strictly adhere, but also to use as a supportive document to ensure their show or fair can go ahead safely.
Alexander Burnett.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary very much for that answer? And can I also ask him to join me in welcoming the virtual Highland Games, which will take place this Saturday, the 12th of September, and just ask if the Cabinet Secretary has come across any other alternative and innovative ways for such events to continue.
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, I'm happy to join the member in welcoming that event, and I pay tribute to the organisers for their imagination. And yes, there have been other events around Scotland of a virtual nature. The Scottish Rural Network has launched a COVID-19 information hub. There has been the Scottish Smallholder Festival 220, which has moved online, for example. You know, I think we all miss, presiding officer, shows and events. My local ones I've been attending for more decades than I wish to remember, really, but they are a fulcrum of rural and social activity in our country, and they really are sorely missed. So we all look forward to seeing them resume next year.
Angus MacDonald, to be followed by Gillian Martin.
Thanks, President Officer. The impact of COVID-19 clearly highlights how vital the agricultural sector is, not just to the economy, but to ensuring that the nation is fed. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline how the Scottish Government will work to maximise local promotion and purchase of fresh, healthy Scottish produce?
Quite broad, but briefly, Fergus Young.
Yes, well, I do agree. And during COVID, I think there has been perhaps a revisiting on part of many individuals of their habits, eating habits and cooking arrangements. And the move towards local food has been perhaps marked in many different ways. So that's why in this year's programme for government I've committed to developing a local food strategy for Scotland, and I'm working in a ministerial group on this matter to publish a statement of national policy. And I think there are many, many ways, as Mr MacDonald well knows, that we can celebrate and encourage the increased consumption of high-quality Scottish local produce.
And Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I share Mr Burnett's concern about the effects of the cancellation of our agricultural shows, but it's just one aspect of the pain the rural economy is feeling. The end of the UK Government's furlough scheme is in sight, and the scheme is likely to be masking current and potential rural unemployment levels. Can the Cabinet Secretary advise what support and reassurance he can offer those sectors worst affected by COVID, particularly in the rural economy, who are struggling to recover, given the UK have so far refused to extend the scheme beyond October?
Again, quite a broad interpretation, but briefly, Fergus Young.
Well, we have provided support to alleviate hardship in numerous sectors, the shellfish, the sea fish sector, the tourism sector, all of those sectors most affected by COVID. But the member, Gillian Martin, is absolutely right. The furlough scheme, when it expires in October, will leave hundreds of thousands of people in Scotland facing potential redundancy, and millions across the UK, millions. That's why I have urged Nigel Huddleston, my counterpart, the Tourism Minister in the UK, to make the strongest representations to the Treasury to revisit their refusal to extend the furlough scheme, or at least replace it with the job support package. Otherwise, I fear there will be unemployment, Presiding Officer, unprecedented in our joint lifetimes, and that's quite a few years.
Thank you for that vote of confidence, Mr Ewing. Question number 3, Jeremy Balfour.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action is taken to encourage domestic tourism.
Cabinet Secretary Fergus Ewing.
We are clear that where it's safe, visitors from within Scotland and across the UK are very welcome to holiday in Scotland. We simply ask that people holidaying in and visiting Scotland do so in a responsible way that respects our people, communities and environment. To help with this, Visit Scotland launched a £3 million marketing campaign encouraging Scots to travel within Scotland and to appreciate what's on offer in their own country. And Visit Scotland also worked with its counterparts across the UK on the We're Good to Go industry standard, which allowed businesses across all sectors to demonstrate that they are adhering to the government and public health guidance and are safe to visit.
Jeremy Balfour.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer? He will be aware that the Scottish Conservatives recently published Job Plan Powering Up Scotland. We say that domestic tourism is vital to Scotland's economy, especially while international tourism is largely reduced to this virus. Will the Scottish Government take on board our proposal of a marketing campaign for the rest of the UK, and what date will it be implemented?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think we have to be mindful of the position with regard to COVID and all exert due vigilance. We are, of course, welcoming to people coming to Scotland, but I think we have to be extremely careful about the precise position that Scotland and the UK is in at the moment, and each make decisions that with regard our own personal responsibility. I'm happy to work with anyone and everyone in order to promote tourism across these islands, but I would say if the Conservatives wish to do something positive, something clear, something decisive, something influential to help us all, it will be to indicate now that they will review their refusal to extend the furlough scheme. That is the most important thing, Presiding Officer, beyond doubt.
Kenneth Gibson, to be followed by Claire Baker.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that it is the height of hypocrisy for Tories to demand more action of this government on tourism in the very same week that recently ousted leader Jackson Carlaw called for an end to furlough? Clearly, he agrees that extending furlough through winter is absolutely crucial if we are not to see thousands of job losses in our tourism industry. And will he again approach the UK Government with further demands that furlough is maintained for this winter?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I do have sympathy for Mr Gibson's remarks. What I would say is that, yes, of course, I will continue to advocate the path of providing support for people who face redundancy, almost certain redundancy, towards the end of autumn this year. And I have to say I do have constructive relations with Nigel Huddleston, my UK counterpart. The question remains what influence he will have with the UK government. These problems are affecting tourism all over the UK, particularly in cities, particularly hotels in cities, and not least in London. So in some ways it's surprising that there hasn't been a more timely response. And the problem is, this is time sensitive. Large companies have to issue redundancy notices quite rightly in advance. The longer they delay a proper, commensurate, sufficient response to the impending tsunami of unemployment, the greater the human misery will be. So this is really time sensitive and really important.
Claire Baker.
Thank you. Visitor attractions are an important part of domestic tourism. I'd be interested in the Cabinet Secretary's response to calls from representatives of visitor attractions that distancing is reduced to 1 metre, which would be the same as the hospitality sector. They're obviously going to face a very difficult time over the next few months, even though they have been able to open for a brief time. There is a need for them to increase income to get them through to next season.
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, I think I have much sympathy with that. I've had numerous conference calls with ASVA, the Association of Scottish Visitor Attractions, led very ably by Gordon Morrison and by Susan Morrison, and I'm acutely aware of the fact that because the 2-metre rule still applies to some visitor attractions, that is making it extremely difficult for some businesses to operate viably. Indeed, that may be the biggest ask they have at the moment. Some of them have received financial support, but with the reduced number of clients or visitors that they have with 2 metres, it is for some extremely difficult to operate. So we are looking at that very carefully, but we have to balance the public health issues with the industry issues. It's a very difficult balance indeed. And at the moment, over the last few days, we have all seen, sadly, the rising figures of of numbers of people found to have COVID. We therefore do need to be extremely careful, as the First Minister has outlined. But I do think the member raises a very serious point, and it's one that I'm considering constantly, as are my officials. And as soon as it's safe to do so, I think we would all see as want to reduce the social distancing from 2 metres to 1 metre for visitor attractions, as well as other establishments.
Question number 4, Sinead Robertson.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what plans it has to support Dundee and its tourism sector to ensure that the city can safely welcome back visitors.
Minister Marie Gougeon.
Dundee has featured within each phase of Visit Scotland's strategic marketing recovery activity, and Dundee's tourism businesses have also benefited from our wide range of financial and other support. And looking ahead, Visit Scotland will continue to work with partners in the city through the Dundee Tourism Leadership Group and other fora to support the recovery of the sector. And that will really be to share insights to ensure that the city is represented within their own activities and support business support and development opportunities.
Sinead Robertson.
Thank you. Will the Minister join me in paying tribute to V&A Dundee, which is leading a campaign to raise £1 million to aid the city's economic recovery from COVID-19, which has already received sizable donations of £500,000 from the Northwood Charitable Trust and £200,000 from Alistair Locke and Tim Allen, who chairs the V&A Dundee? And will the Minister welcome the campaign, but also say what further support the Scottish Government can give visitor attractions like V&A, Discovery Point and other attractions in the city?
Minister.
I would absolutely join in with Shona Robison there in paying tribute to the V&A Dundee, and absolutely welcome the willingness of the V&A, the Northwood Charitable Trust and all the other organisations that have been involved in establishing this excellent initiative in Dundee, because I think it's a fantastic example of how different institutions and charities can come together to try and find innovative solutions to recovery. And I really hope that people and businesses in Dundee will get behind that campaign. Now, the Scottish Government is committed to doing all we can to help our world-class culture sector in these what are very challenging and uncertain times. And we've provided significant support to cultural organisations across Scotland and including Dundee. And the latest £59 million funding package that we announced on the 28th of August will protect elements of our critical cultural infrastructure by helping organisations to stave off insolvency, protect jobs and create the best possible conditions for recovery.
Thank you. Question 5, Dean Lockhart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it's taking to tackle so-called dirty camping in the Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Park.
Minister Mary Gushan.
Loch Lomond and the Trossachs National Park Authority is responsible for protecting the national park and reducing the impact of visitor and recreational pressures. They're working closely with Police Scotland, local authorities and other agencies to address instances of irresponsible behaviour. And more broadly, the Scottish Government is working with public sector partners, including Nature Scot, to promote responsible use of the outdoors. And as I mentioned in a previous answer in Environment Questions, the Cabinet Secretary for the Rural Economy and Tourism will be convening a roundtable meeting of public sector agencies on Monday the 14th of September to look at a coordinated approach to dealing with these issues.
Dean Lockhart.
I thank the Minister for that response. Since lockdown restrictions have been eased, the number of people visiting that area has increased substantially. The vast majority do so responsibly. However, there is a significant minority who cause damage by leaving behind litter, abandoned campsites, damaging trees and the natural habitat. The National Park, relevant councils and Police Scotland don't have the sufficient resources to ensure effective enforcement of the bylaws mentioned by the Minister. So can the Minister outline what further actions the Scottish Government can take to make enforcement of those bylaws more effective and to avoid further damage in this area?
Minister Mary Gushan.
I thank the member for that question, and as I've said previously, I understand that this is a very important issue. It's an issue that a number of members have raised across the chamber, and which in fact we'll be discussing as part of a members' debate tonight, because as Dean Lockhart rightly says, it is a minority of people who undertake this kind of behaviour and who are determined to try and ruin it for everyone else. But I would say to that the Park Authority, together with Police Scotland, have the appropriate powers between them to address the sort of antisocial and irresponsible behaviour that has been experienced in the National Park over the summer. But as I said in my initial response and to previous questions that I've had on this, we do take these issues very, very seriously. And that's exactly why the Cabinet Secretary is holding the meeting that he's holding on Monday, where I believe the National Parks will be taking part as well, so that we can look at these issues and look at what more can be done to fully address and tackle them.
And Mark Ruskell.
Thanks. I think we do really need to be solutions focused here. So alongside the education and the enforcement, we also need a discussion about appropriate facilities to deal with the demand. I wanted to ask the Minister what progress has been made with the Forestry and Land Scotland trial to allow camper vans to use empty car parks at night, away from residential areas, in spaces where they can be monitored, very much picking up on the sort of model of visitor management that they adopt in the French Alps?
Minister Marie-Goujon.
In response to that, I would say that the project that's underway at the moment is continuing and it seems to have been operating positively so far. But again, that is something that we will continue to monitor. And if there are any lessons to be learned from that or matters that we can roll out, then that's exactly what we will do. And again, that's where the summit on Monday will be vitally important to, again, it's about finding solutions and looking at what we can do in the short, medium and longer term to really tackle these problems.
Thank you. Question number 6, Maureen Watt.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when it will provide updated guidance regarding weddings in light of the importance of the wedding sector to tourism and the economy of the North East.
Cabinet Secretary Fergus Ewing.
The Scottish Government is aware of the difficulties facing the wedding sector throughout Scotland, and we are conscious of the contribution they make to the economy and people's lives. Throughout August, I met representatives from the sector to listen to their concerns. We are working with the sector to finalise guidance following the First Minister's announcement on 20th of August. I hope we can provide any further details soon.
Maureen Watt.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer? Given that once venues are able to operate, many who have postponed plans for weddings will come back, probably leading to unprecedented demand on venues, caterers, bands, florists and many others. So does the Minister believe that special consideration through increasing the furlough period or indeed specific discretionary funding should be given consideration to this sector?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I am acutely aware of the devastating impacts on this sector. The member, Maureen Watt, is quite right. I've spoken individually to businesses about this. The outlook will be different for each, but they have really been impacted very, very severely. So our total package of financial support, now over £2.3 billion, has helped many businesses. We do believe the furlough should be extended. We will continue to push the UK Government to provide the support required for the sector.
Colin Smith to be followed by Oliver Mundell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister told Parliament on the 20th of August, we hope that from the 14th of September, wedding and civil partnership receptions will be able to take place with more attendees and guidance would be issued shortly. Does the Cabinet Secretary really think that 3 weeks after that statement, just days before the 14th of September, it is acceptable that we still haven't seen that guidance yet? We're going to have couples eloping from Gretna Green to England to get married instead of the other way around.
Cabinet Secretary Fergus Ewing.
I would just point Mr Smith to... I'm not going to comment about the elopement, I think I'll just avoid that, but what I would say, really, to be in all seriousness, is since the 20th of August, Presiding Officer, we have seen all over Britain the numbers of those infected with the virus increase. None of us perhaps expected that, none of us wanted that, but all of us have to respond to that. And I think that consideration must be given preference at this time.
And Oliver Mundell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm glad the Cabinet Secretary is not bothered about elopement, because there won't be a Gretna Green recognisable for people to get married in, because this government has failed to deliver for the wedding industry. It's left couples in limbo, people having to put off a major life event. Why has it taken so long to put guidance in place? I raised these issues with the Cabinet Secretary before the summer recess, and we're now months further forward and people don't have details, and it's costing jobs and it's costing people the chance to get married.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I have been in regular contact with businesses, not least in Gretna Green, who have had devastating impacts, and I've sought to maintain that contact, and I will do so. I just say to the member, we are in the middle of a pandemic, so please do try to bear that. Do try to bear that in mind. In government, we have to take decisions that involve people's lives as well as their livelihoods. It's an extremely difficult balance, and we are not saying we get everything right. The First Minister has made that absolutely clear. But please give us the credit for taking these matters extremely seriously.
We'll see if we can get any other questions in. Question 7, Joanne Lamond.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what support it is providing to tourism venues across Glasgow that are facing financial hardship due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, we do completely understand the severe impact of the pandemic on tourism in Scotland, particularly in our cities, and we have acted quickly to provide financial support, which now exceeds £2.3 billion in total. We have provided a range of different grants and rates relief tailored to the differing needs of tourism and hospitality businesses across Scotland. We recently launched our £14 million hotel recovery programme to help secure up to 3,000 jobs at Scotland's larger hotels, and are also supporting the events industry with additional funding of £10 million. We're working hard with industry to identify further action with the Tourism Task Force central to this process.
Joanne Lamond.
Thank you. The tourism industry is vitally important to Glasgow's economy, delivering hundreds of millions of pounds every year. Will the Minister review the take-up rate for the Hardship Fund to ensure all Glasgow venues requesting support receive it?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, of course, we do want to make sure that businesses that suffer from financial hardship as a result of the COVID epidemic get what assistance they can. That has been the kind of watchword and the approach here, not to compensate for all revenue or income lost, impossible, but rather to identify financial hardship and seek to alleviate that. I'm very happy to work with the member and indeed all other members who identify any particular business who they believe is in a situation of financial hardship but hasn't received support. But I do believe that at this particular point in the pandemic, we have close to exhausted the funding available to us to meet these compensations. So the situation is extremely difficult, I appreciate, for Ms Lamont's constituents and many other businesses around Scotland. We will continue, however, to do everything we can in practical, pragmatic terms to alleviate financial hardship caused to tourism businesses by the COVID pandemic.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. My apologies to Sandra White, to Jamie Halker-Johnson in particular, who waited patiently to ask this question a second time. But I'm afraid, although we've overrun, we've gone too far. We now have to move on to the next item of business. There'll be a short pause while we do so.